Yeah.
Okay, good morning. It's almost afternoon. But we're continuing the laws of Kashrut. Yesterday we learned some very important principles. Still on the board. Kibalo kach poto, that was review, and then we learned about the concept of ben yomo, that the pot that absorbed the taste only has potency to spit out that taste and release it for 24 hours. Afterwards, it doesn't make the food, it doesn't spit out that taste, and if you happen to be using the wrong type of vessel, it doesn't actually invalidate the food itself, even if it did absorb. Okay? And we also learned a little bit about the differences between the different materials. We said that we read the pasuk in the Torah, which spoke about the clay vessels, earthenware vessels, absorbing so much that they can never really be kashered. It's usually the way we say it. Earthenware vessels have to be broken if they become non-kosher, as opposed to copper and all the metals that we've been speaking about, where there's this process of kashering dishes. And although we said technically maybe you could fire it up again, the danger is that sometimes the rabbis, they say you can't use that method because the dishes will break. You know, most times if you put a blowtorch to an earthenware vessel, it'll get ruined. And so even if we say you're allowed to do that method, then people won't be doing it properly. And so they just said earthenware, we don't kasher. It cannot be kashered. It's forbidden forever. If you get forbidden taste in it, it cannot be used again, as opposed to the metals, which can be. Then we went and we mentioned...
Most porcelain today, though, can be because it's coated in glass, as it were, if it's glazed.
Yes, so we're going to talk about the glazed in just a few minutes, okay? I'll just review one more thing, and then I'll take questions. We also mentioned glass. Glass, how we saw that there's a number of opinions how to treat glass. Maybe our glass today is much less permeable than it was. And so the issue is that ultimately glass is made from sand, which is like earth, and so maybe it should have the status of earthenware, and it's never going to properly spit out the taste that it absorbs. And so if it gets treif, if it gets milk, or if it gets meat, that is its status forever. It can never be kashered. And that extreme position is more common in the Ashkenazi world. And the opposite extreme is more common in the Sephardi. Some Sephardi poskim say, well, glass is so impermeable and so smooth and hard, it never absorbs any taste. And essentially, therefore you can use it for milchik and for fleishach interchangeably, because it doesn't absorb any taste at all. That's the other extreme, and there's some Sephardi poskim who paskin that way even today. But the way Rav Melamed presented is probably the correct approach. I like his approach on this, that the majority of Ashkenazi world and the majority of the Sephardi world, for all intents and purposes, treat glass like metal, and that it may absorb, but you can kasher it afterwards by doing the hachshara, hagala. Usually it's through water. You put it into boiling hot water. There is an element, maybe you should do it 3 times, because there's a Yerushalmi quoted by the Itur, if I'm not mistaken. Sorry, let me just check that up. It was quoted just before that. Yeah, Yerushalmi made famous by the Itur that the Yerushalmi spoke about taste which was only forbidden rabbinically, that it can be released and purged from the vessel when you do haga'ala, that's boiling hot water, 3 times. And so sometimes we use that method when we have a case of a doubt. It's a sort of a middle ground. So some people say that the glass does absorb, but it can be kashered. And you'll see a lot of people that are, before Pesach, they're kashering their glass. And it's really not appropriate according to the Ashkenazi, pure Ashkenazi custom. It's not appropriate according to the pure Sephardi custom. It doesn't need anything. But according to many Ashkenazim and Sephardim, it is appropriate. It makes sense because glass can be treated like metal, and that it may absorb some, but it can also haga'ala, the process of kashering, can get rid of that taste that's forbidden now, whatever it is, whether it's chametz or milk or treif. Also, another consideration is that usually what people are using glass for is not for cooking. Usually it's plates, glasses, which is what's called klisheni. It's not something used for actually cooking, and therefore there's more room to be lenient about it because it doesn't really absorb the taste in the strongest way, like actually cooking it in fire or with boiling hot water in the first place. And so many times what you'll see people doing is doing their hagala, their hachshara of glass, but usually it's glass dishes or glasses but not actual cooking glass dishes. But that can be allowed as well. As I said, there's a few approaches to that. It'll be rare to find Ashkenazim doing that, but Rav Melamed justifies it, and he says it's a debate how to treat glass. We have the range of opinions, and to go with the middle ground makes a lot of sense, that you can kasher glass. Okay? Now I'll take questions. That was a review, pretty much, of what we talked about yesterday. Yes, Ben?
So, theoretically, if we were to take a tray, ceramic dish, right?
Yeah.
Glaze or whatever, it has the taste in it. You break it up, then you break it up into a dust, let's say, right? You add water to it, you refire it. Is it kosher?
Yes. Very impractical. I don't think anybody would ever do that in their lives, but technically, yes. Yes.
Yeah, you're making a new plate.
Right. As we said, technically by fire, if you're, fire should be able to get things out even out of earthenware, but usually we don't kasher earthenware. Okay, now glazed earthenware, which is very common. So most plates in most people's homes, there's lots of different kinds. No, porcelain is something else.
Oh, you're saying glazed? Yeah.
Glazed it's basically an earthenware dish that is covered. It's dipped into essentially glass. It's a liquid glass. Sometimes in the olden days, it was painted on, but nowadays they actually just take the earthenware, the dish, and they dip it into this glass-like substance. And so you have a thin layer of glass, a glaze that's covering it. What is its status? So here there's room to treat it like glass, and there's room to treat it like earthenware. Which is it? So usually we treat it like earthenware because that's the
Sufficient enough, that glass.
that glaze, many times it gets chipped,
Right.
and then the taste is going to go into the earthenware as well. And in most cases we don't kasher this earthenware that's been glazed. We treat it like earthenware, and it cannot be kashered. There is an exception. Sorry. Yeah, there's a special heter, people know about it, for china, fine china. Corel is not exactly china.
But it's the same.
Porcelain. What is porcelain?
I don't know, it's Chinese-made China plate.
Right. So porcelain. Yeah, it's very expensive earthenware. Essentially, it's made from the same stuff, but it's very expensive. It's made through a special process, and it's very expensive. It's called basically porcelain is expensive earthenware, and I've given this heter a number of times to Bali Tshuva. It's based on a tshuva of Moshe Feinstein. Moshe Feinstein, sometimes it happens, you inherit a very expensive, it could be thousands of dollars, a set of china, fine china, And it's worth a lot of money. People, they say it's very fancy. I don't know exactly what's so special. It's beautiful. I think it's very thin. Even though it's earthenware, you can still be light and thin and very pretty. They make it so anyways, what happens if you inherit it from your parents who might even be not Jewish, let's say they didn't keep kosher. They're Jewish, but they didn't keep kosher, and now it hasn't been used for 30 years. And it's a memento of your parents' home, and it's very expensive, and it's very nice. People like nice, expensive things for their home. So Rav Moshe said that if it hasn't been used for a long time, over 12 months, if it hasn't been used for a year, and then he said you can kasher it 3 times. You put it in the boiling hot water 3 times. Obviously, he was relating to this Itur and the Yerushalmi that I mentioned before. And he said, for people that are Bali Tshuva, and they're trying to come close to Judaism, and it would be a tremendous expense or loss to them, both emotionally and perhaps financially, there's room to be lenient. And it's surprising sometimes, but these family heirlooms can be very meaningful to people, even though they're dishes. Nowadays you can buy dishes for nothing, but you have to respect people's feelings. And if somebody is in a process of returning, and you don't want to make it hard on them to keep the mitzvot, and so there is this heter given. Sometimes it used to be more secret, and only people in the know would know about it. But nowadays we're in an age where a few clicks on the internet, everybody knows about this heter, and so there's nothing to hide, and it is applicable in some circumstances. Obviously, it's not ideal, because ideally, earthenware has to be broken. It's a pasuk in the Torah that it retains its taste forever. It can never be released. But in the case of when there is a need, it's after 24 hours, so taste is going to be released into the food that you eat, and especially we're talking about plates, which is they didn't absorb it firsthand from the fire in any case. So and all those reasons, there is room to be lenient. Okay, now, today's topic. Any more questions about yesterday's topic, or we're good? We understand the differences. The big question is, and this is where Rav Melamed, we love his books, we love his teaching, is very clear, it's very wise. Sometimes though, like every rabbi, he takes positions according to his understanding of the halacha. It's totally legitimate. Here, he goes out on a limb. And he doesn't like to leave things up in the air. And we started to discuss it the other day, and that is, I think Renan was here, we were speaking about metals. It's been proven today, and they've done studies, that the metals that we're using, they don't absorb any taste. The taste that they absorb is 1 part in 30,000. It's definitely a lot less than 1/60th. So, and then Rav Melamed writes that besides those studies that he quotes, and rabbis have been doing studies as well, it's not only the secular scientists or goyim, and he says, in my community, Rav Melamed is the chief rabbi of a town called Har Bracha, where he's got a nice big community of people that love his guidance and follow him, and they come to his shirim regularly. And so he said, over the course of years, I challenged all of my community, God-fearing Jews, many scholars, husbands and wives. I said, please test it out. Try to see if you can taste any taste of the previous food from your cooking. And he said, over the course of the years, hundreds of people followed his guidance and did this experiment. And not one could taste the previous food after using the metal dishes, even if it was within 24 hours. there were the one or two exceptions, and he said usually what happened was they found out that it wasn't washed properly externally. A kid, was doing the dishes and he didn't actually scrub away all the residue. But if you scrubbed away all the residue with our soap that was common, which is much stronger than it used to be, that's another element that Rav Melamed puts into it, and he says there's no absorption of taste in metals anymore. The question is, what do you do with that? So he divides it into two. He says, when it comes to kashering the dishes and the requirement to kasher dishes, that may be a mitzvah midoraita. Goes back to the story of Midian. If you think about it, we learned that they conquered the Midianites and they wanted to use their vessels, and the Elazar told them, this is the law of Moshe from God, that you have to put them in the fire or put them in the boiling hot water in order to get out. Was it within 24 hours? No. Who knows? You could say that, the same day that they won the war, they wanted to use the dishes. But probably the dishes were used by the Midianites, a month ago or a week ago, whatever it is. It's clearly after 24 hours. And so there's no taste anyways. And so it could be that the requirement to kasher dishes that got forbidden taste in them is biblical no matter what. Regardless of the issue of taste or no taste. The fact that it at one point was used with non-kosher food or milk or meat together or one after the other, if it absorbed the non-kosher substance, it has to be kashered. So here, and it's regardless of taste. So same thing with metal dishes. Even if you say there's no taste in them whatsoever, even within 24 hours, you still have to kasher them. You still have to kasher them. So that side of the coin, he's machmir, and he says, I'm not going to follow the science because it seems like the law of kashering dishes is regardless of the issue of taste. But when it comes to the food cooked in these pots, here he goes out on a limb. He's not the only one. He quotes famously Rav Lior. I'll just make a little footnote. I told you I don't like to discuss rabbinic politics. It's very hurtful, it's very damaging. But I did tell you that there was recently a group of rabbis who tried to criticize Rav Melamed. And one of the people that signed a letter against Rav Melamed was Rav Dov Lior, who used to be the chief rabbi in Kiryat Arba. He's retired now. He's a tremendous Talmid Chacham, one of the greats of our religious Zionist community, also a student of Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kohen Cook. Anyways, he signed this letter against Rav Melamed, saying how Rav Melamed is, going out on a limb. He's making halachot which are not he doesn't have the authority to. It's a little bit curious because he paskined like before Rav Melamed that we have to follow the science. If there's no taste, the food doesn't become non-kosher. So in other words, now, so obviously there's many different issues, but obviously he thinks Rav Melamed's reasoning is solid. He wrote in his tshuva many years ago that according to the recent science, if there's no absorption, no absorption. So the food doesn't become non-kosher. If you take a non-kosher metal pot that was used with non-kosher food within 24 hours, and then you cook up some kosher food in it, according to the science, there's no taste that gets transferred, and the food is still kosher. So Rav Lior wrote that that's true, but I don't want to do anything unless another rabbi agrees with me. Because it's a radical change from the way halacha used to be. And Rav Rabinovich also wrote something like that. Anyways, Rav Melamed goes that, and he says, if that happened, and you cooked, for example, your chicken soup in your milchik pot, even though it was used within 24 hours, if it's a metal pot, the chicken soup is still kosher. So he's lenient about the transfer of taste based on this. This is not standard practice. I wouldn't paskin like that. Standard is that if it's within 24 hours, the taste gets transferred. And I mentioned the previous day when we were talking about this, why? It could be just we want to standardize. And, maybe some metals are more porous, some are less. That's the way we discussed it. And it could be the formula, sometimes the halacha turns from reality to formalistic understanding. And there's that 24 hours, whether or not taste is 23 hours or 25 hours, I don't know. But the halacha defines categories. And the category is, if it's been used within 24 hours, it's forbidden. It causes the taste to transfer. Whether or not the taste does transfer or not, 24 hours is a rule defined by our sages in the Gemara a lot, 2,000 years ago. We're not going to change that because of some laboratory study. And the formalistic definition of the rules of transfer of taste apply. And that's what Rav Yaakov Ariel, another rabbi who's alive today, he disagrees with this leniency of Rav Lior and Rav Melamed and Rav Rabinovich, and he says we have to follow the standard halacha, and that is that if it's used within 24 hours, taste, it becomes forbidden. Whether taste transferred or didn't taste transfer, I don't care if you use a laboratory to show, or if you use a goy to taste, or if you use a Jew to taste, doesn't matter. 24 hours, whatever forbidden taste that was in it is going to be transferred to the new food, and the food is non-kosher. That's what I do as well. That's what I paskin. Rav Melamed has a leniency here. Not the end of the world. Totally justified. I understand the logic of it. And if you want to follow him, it's not the end of the world. That's the end of the world. I'll take some questions. Yeah.
So I understand the debate, right, as far as whether or not food is kosher or not kosher from like a stainless steel pot. Right?
Exactly. That's the question.
But so far as the status of the pot itself, you're basically saying that regardless of the status of the kosher food inside of it, it needs to be kosher.
True. True. The vessels, we try not to use the same vessels for milk and meat and treif. You have to kosher your vessels to use them in a Jewish home. Yeah.
But, like, why? Like, is it like to be like kelim? Like in the pasukim itself,
in this approach,
about nechoshet and
right?
And clay, which are things that are porous.
Not clay. All metals. They're all metals. Zahav, kesef, nechoshet, bdil, ofaret. Those are all metals.
What does it say, barzel?
Barzel, yes, it does. Barzel. Metals. All metals. So the pasuk says very clearly that metals have to be kashered. And you're right that this approach, if we're saying that it's independent of the question of transfer of taste or not, it's very similar to the law of tevilat kelim, which we learned last week, which is putting it in a mikvah, not hot water or burning fire. It's a separate issue of possession by non-Jews, and bringing into the possession of the holiness of food, of Jewish people. In this way, this approach makes the two very close. In other words, the fact that it got not kosher at one point, whether or not the taste is going to transfer or not, it has to be put through this process of koshering. You're right, there's a similarity there in this approach. It's not actually about the getting rid of the actual taste, but it's the ritual that has to be done to kosher your vessels. Good catch. Yeah.
I'm seeing it as a bit of definitions. When the rabbis said metal, they were talking about bronze. They were talking about iron, cast metals. They weren't talking about stainless steel. Remember, we talked about how turkey wouldn't have been kosher except they mistakenly thought it was a chicken for long enough.
Mm-hmm.
Could it be that these materials that they're coming up with aren't within the halachic definition of a metal?
Could be. It could be. The fact that the metals that we use today are much more pure and much more impermeable than the ones. Who was talking to me the other day that they add lots of different.
We have purposeful alloys. It's stainless steel.
Exactly.
Alloy.
Right. Which means.
Which means that it's multiple metals mixed together in a precise.
Right.
Like in precise quantities. Like
right.
sterling silver.
Right.
Is 92.5% silver, and the rest of it's copper.
Right. So it makes sense. Rav Melamed's approach makes sense. So the bottom line is, if the reality changes, then the halacha changes, and if there's no taste transfer. Both proven in the laboratory and in real life by taste test, then there's no reason to be machmir. And if someone comes to me and they're very poor, and they said, I made my chicken soup for Shabbos in my milchik pot, even though it's within 24 hours, it could be I'll be lenient, because for them to throw out their chicken soup and not to have any food for Shabbos, it's a very high Jewish value. And so you're always weighing out the values. So there's room to be lenient. It's a cogent halachic argument, but standard case is, okay, I made pasta, in a fleischig pot and I put in chicken, or I put in with cheese, and it's a fleischig pot. So then, okay, throw out your pasta. What's it, 5 shekels? You don't eat the pasta. You eat something else. You always have something else in the kitchen. So for those 5 shekels, I'm not going to jettison the standard approach, which is that halacha is if you use the pot of the wrong kind within 24 hours, the food is going to become treif, and we throw out the food. That's still, so it depends on the situation. But we have widened up the range of possibilities for flexibility in a case of need. It makes a lot of sense in a case of need to follow Rav Melamed and Rav Lior and Rav Rabinovich and the other people that he quote that follow the science. Yes?
So when it comes to the utensils that we use for cooking, let's say one is used for cooking basuri and the other is for halal.
Okay.
However, when I want to cook something parve, like
We're coming up
fish,
to it. We're coming up to it. We're coming up to it. It's coming up. The parve issue is coming up soon. First, one more issue that we have to discuss, then we're going to get into the issue of, parve and all that. That is other materials. We've talked about metal. We've talked about earthenware. And we've talked about glass. And we talked about glass. Is it like earthenware? Is it like metal? We said different opinions. And so what about everything else? There's wood. There's vessels made out of wood. There's vessels made out of bone. There's vessels made out of leather. Okay? Leaves, sure.
Leaves
All kinds. So what about all the other types of vessels? So the simple pshat, the simple understanding is that all those other vessels absorb taste. Just like we assume that the metals do, right? They absorb taste, and then they Teflon, right? Teflon. What's Teflon?
It's it's purely synthetic.
Well, it's a combination of metals and plastics, actually.
Als bulletproof vest, right? I mean,
That's kevlar.
okay.
That's something else. And then, of course, plastic dishes. So we assume that they absorb and release taste, and therefore the laws that we've been talking about apply to them. It's only the earthenware. Now we mentioned the other day. What about this? This is metal, but it's coated with. It's called enamel. It's not Teflon. It's enamel. Or email, it's called in Hebrew for some reason. Someone left the nun out, left the n out. For some reason, in the Hebrew they call enamel email. It's the same word. Anyways, it's a debate because the inside is metal, the outside is enamel, and it's so similar to what we talked about the glaze on the earthenware plates, but there's room to treat it as the enamel is made from earthenware. It's like the opposite case. You've got metal inside and earthenware on the outside. So do you treat it as earthenware, which is you can't kosher it, or do you treat it like metal, which you can kosher? And I think many poskim say that you treat it like metal, and that's essentially what it is. And it's very hard. The layer of enamel is glass-like, even though it's made from earthenware. It's very hard, non-porous material, and therefore you can treat that outer layer like glass. And said, perhaps you can be lenient and treat it like metals as well. Okay, so
Kevlar. Somebody brought that up down there.
What is Kevlar? I don't know. Does it used for dishes? I don't think it's used for.
It's used for bulletproof things.
Okay, so what? You have bulletproof dishes? Now that's impressive.
Soldiers sometimes use their helmets, which are made out of Kevlar. If you're in the field, you have nothing else to eat. Take off your helmet, scrub it out, and your food goes into it.
I don't know what it is, but we assume it absorbs taste. Anything other than absorbs taste and releases taste, it's more like metal than it is earthenware. It's not made from earth, as far as I know. So
So,
Okay, let's just finish up. There is a debate about plastics. Plastic ware, for the first few years, maybe even 10 years, many rabbis said you cannot kosher plastic. Because the plastic, you've probably even seen some dishes like that. Plastic didn't used to be as cheap as it was, and the plastic it still gets ridges in it. Right? If you cut with a knife on a cutting board, right? They sell plastic cutting boards because it's supposed to be, not cuttable. It doesn't cause, but in the end, after a while, it gets the ridges, and in the ridges, food gets stuck, and it's very hard to clean it out. That's why you buy a new cutting board after a while. They're so cheap nowadays. But same thing with plastic dishes. The custom was, many rabbis said you can't kosher plastic because of all the problem with the ridges. But bottom line is today, most plastics, there's no reason to say that plastic is like earthenware. They can't be koshered. And if you clean it well, if you have good detergent, or you see that it doesn't have a lot of ridges in it, a lot of holes in it, a lot of little crevices, so then bottom line is it's like all the other vessels that can be koshered, like bone and wood and leather and metals that they absorb taste, and they can spit out the taste. I remember, this dates me a little bit, but back in the 90s, 94 I believe, I was in yeshiva, and we were merited to welcome in thousands and thousands of new olim from Ethiopia. I think it was called Mivtza Moshe. And it was right before Pesach, and there was these thousands of Ethiopians in absorption centers. They didn't have any homes, they didn't know Hebrew, they didn't know how to use toilets, to tell you the truth. They didn't have that in Africa. In any case, a group of them came to my yeshiva to stay for Pesach, and we taught them a seder. We gave them a seder with translators, of course, and we taught them how to use the toilets, of course. But the question is, what dishes are we going to use? It was Pesach. The dishes in yeshiva, most yeshivas, are plastic, hard plastic. Here, what do they use here?
Disposable.
We have to change that. But in any case, what do? We don't kosher plastic. This was the standard. It's what it says in all the books. Bottom line is, the rabbi said, of course you can kosher plastic. Just make sure that the plastic is cleaned well, doesn't have these very serious ridges in it, and we assume that anything that's not earthenware, why should you give it the status of earthenware? So it has the status of all those metals in the Torah. You kosher it. And I spend hours dipping those plastic plates into the boiling hot vats, boiling water, and we koshered all the entire yeshiva. We're talking about hundreds of, it's a dining room that serves a couple hundred. We koshered all the kitchen for Pesach, and we had Pesach with the Ethiopians. It was quite an experience. So by all means, you're going to see many people before Pesach koshering their plasticware, and there's room to be lenient to kosher the plasticware. Of course, if you see one that's like, full of dirt and, it looks, that one I would maybe put aside and not, but it's up to them, not you, if you're just working there. But if it's in your own home, if it's a very marked up and it has lots of holes in it, so maybe you didn't get out all the food, and you're not going to use a blowtorch on it. So, for all intents and purposes, you can kosher plastic if it's clean and smooth, and if you need to, that's the dishes that you have, you're allowed to. But other than that, there is a tradition here, sort of a custom of that plastics are not koshered, but I explained to you the history. It's just because of the history. Other than that, plastic should be like any other material that's not earthenware that you can kosher. Okay, Ben, you were waiting patiently. Thank you.
So, given that metal also comes from the ground, and glass comes from sand, right? And we say that glass is non-absorptive, even though it's, at least some people say this. Because why? Because
metal is mined from the ground. It's not made up of earth.
it's made up of earth.
It's a like a rock, right? It's a what?
It comes from ore.
Ore, right? So it's a separate material.
It's a rock.
Listen, everything you could say is organic. So everything organic. So listen, yeah, but
Glasses
there's
also-
clearly a category called metals, right? And the Torah has a list of 7 of them. And there's, we know the difference between a metal and earth, stuff made from sand or from earth. Don't get crazy on me. Yeah. Okay.
Regarding aluminum foil and the
Elements?
Aluminum foil.
Aluminum foil.
And what is the other one called? The disposable metal.
Aluminum tray.
Also aluminum
Yeah, the
trays.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
We spoke about that. We spoke about that when we were talking about tevilat kelim. We said if it's disposable, it's not considered a vessel, so you don't have to.
Sometimes we overuse it.
We reuse it, so right.
But it's still okay.
Yeah,
As long as
as long as it's essentially made to be disposable, then you don't need tevilat kelim. For hachsharat kelim, well, it's a metal. Aluminum is a type of metal, and it can be kashered if you want to kasher aluminum vessels. If it's used with fire, you'd have to use a blowtorch. I don't know. Be a little bit hard to get it red hot. We're going to learn the rules.
It would melt.
But if you only used it with liquid, so then you put it into the boiling hot water and it should be kosher. Okay? Other questions? Other questions? All right. Yes.
Silt, dirt, rock, and sand. 4
You
different
spoke about
categories.
Rob Mohammed and the controversy. Can he be quoted
Yeah, I know.
talking to a
I'm not saying
neighbor?
that's
Can I
an
pull out
exhaustive
one of these
list,
books
but
and say it
that's
says
the
this?
question.
Or will that be equivalent to saying I sent my kids to the Michael Jackson daycare center?
Chas v'chalila. I think it would depend on who you're speaking to.
How seriously has his brand been damaged?
I'll tell you this. One of the genius moves. You guys with me? The team in Har Bracha, his yeshiva, and Rav Melamed himself, his leadership, in response to this recent controversy, they decided to go on a campaign. Nowadays there's, GoFundMe campaigns and crowdfunding and all that. You're familiar with that? So they said that they went to the company that runs these campaigns. I think it's called Charity, with a D. You've seen this before? Anyways, and they said their mouths opened up and they fell on the floor because they never heard of such a thing. But listen to this. They said, our goal is not to fight. Our goal is to learn Torah and teach Torah. And so they started a charity campaign. And I got a call last night. Like, you get call from people, will you donate, right? You spread it around and everybody calls. Machon Meir did such a crowdfunding, a year ago? Yeah, something like that. Anyways, I get a call. I don't know if you've heard, but Machon Har Bracha, Pnei Halacha, we're going on a campaign. What are they asking for? They're not asking for money. They're asking people to commit to a chavruta, to learn a book. And I said, I already gave. Because I went in, I wanted to support them, and I said, I teach a shir. If you teach a shir with 10 people, we have more than 10 people, it's considered to be 40 books over the course of a year. It's true. It's like we read 40 of these volumes. And they're up to now, they've been doing this for about a week, about to 40,000 volumes of Pnei Halacha that people have promised to learn. So there's a tremendous amount of public support for Rabbi Melamed and his books. They're tremendous books. He's a great Talmud Chacham. He is very much consensus. I'd say that the people that are attacking him, they're the one that are on the fringes. Now, that's why I say it depends who you're talking to. If you're talking to people that like to hang out on the fringes, they may take offense. But if you're talking about, I'd say, the vast majority of the religious world, tremendous respect for Rav Melamed and his books, Pnei Halacha. And listen, I'm telling you, we're at the edge. This particular class today, I think it's maybe the only halacha that I told you he's out on the edge here. 99% of the rest of the year, I haven't told you that. He's very much consensus, very much tells you straight halacha. I remember when we were learning the laws of Shabbat, I told you I think this law is crazy. Rav Melamed's out to lunch here. What was I talking about? There it was a chumrah. He said that every Jew has to study 6 hours on Shabbat. Remember that? Guys who were here last year?
Yeah.
I don't know anybody that, counts and tries to make a schedule of Shabbat to make sure that you've got 6 hours of Torah study on Shabbat. Rav Melamed thinks that's the proper way of learning the halacha, and this is what he goes and teaches. So he's got some strange opinions, but every rabbi has unique halachot and unique psakim. But he's not particularly lenient, he's not particularly strict. He is his own man. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm very happy he's his own man because he created a tremendous work of halacha, which is the most popular work of halacha in the 21st century. Over 1 million copies sold, literally. So I don't think, to answer your question, it depends who you're talking to. Some people don't even know his name. In the Haredi world, he's not Haredi, so they reject anybody who's not, doesn't look exactly like, doesn't wear the type of hat that they wear. It's a very segregated community sometimes. So people don't know who he is. Okay, they don't know who he is. But and people who do know who he is, I'd say the majority of people respect him tremendously. And there are some people that are saying, well, wait, we got to watch out. There's this controversy. It's like when you have a beautiful horse, and it gets an injury in one of its legs, so there's like a little wound there. The flies, they're drawn to the wound, right? So we don't have to be like that. I think that's, you don't want to be like the flies picking at a wound. So let's avoid the controversy. Let's learn Torah. Let's learn halacha. We have a beautiful presentation of the rules of Kashrut. We've gotten so far. I'm teaching you the issues. The issue is, so he says you can be lenient about the food if you cooked with the wrong type of pot. Okay, is that beyond the pale? Does that mean that he's to be excommunicated? Because he provides reasons and rationale, and there's even other rabbis who agree with him. So I don't think it's beyond the pale. I think we can still use his books, and I think he still learn the Torah from him, and it's a pleasure. And we're going to keep doing what we're doing. Okay? We're going to stop here for today. Tomorrow, next week we'll continue and finish. So,